The Omega nursed his wounds, not knowing who he was. The Alpha King never corrected her. The rain fell like a silver curtain over the city, blurring the edges of the narrow streets and casting shadows where secrets thrived. Ilara's carriage rattled along the cobbled roads, her heart drumming louder than the wheels. She could see the glow of lanterns flickering in the distance, illuminating alleyways that promised danger at every turn. Tonight, her life would change forever. Her family, proud and wealthy, had always moved in circles where whispers carried like wildfire. But now, those whispers had grown sharp and cold. Accused of a crime she had not committed, one meant to ruin her family's reputation, Ilara had been handed over as a punishment. The punishment was clear. She would be delivered to the most feared man in the city, the mafia boss known only as Darius, the Raven King. No one had ever escaped his grasp. Ilara's palms were clammy as she held the edge of her cloak tight around her. Every step closer to Darius's estate felt like crossing into another world. The carriage stopped at a wrought iron gate, tall and black, twisted with intricate designs that resembled feathers in flight. The gate creaked open, revealing a dark mansion perched on the hill, surrounded by walls as high as a small fortress. Lightning cracked above, illuminating the jagged stone towers. The carriage door opened, and a silent figure waited. A man tall and broad, dressed in black, his face shadowed beneath a hood. He spoke no words, only gestured for her to step out. The wind whipped her hair across her face, and for a moment Ilara wondered if she could turn back. But she could not. Her family's safety demanded this sacrifice, and sacrifice was all she had left. Inside the mansion, the halls were long and cold. Candles flickered in sconces along the walls, casting elongated shadows that danced like ghosts. The air smelled of aged wood and smoke, and every sound she made echoed. She felt as if the walls themselves were watching her, judging her every step. Then she saw him, Darius. He stood at the top of a grand staircase, a silhouette against the storm-lit window behind him. Even from a distance, his presence was commanding, almost terrifying. He had dark hair that fell just above sharp, calculating eyes. His posture was regal, yet dangerous, like a king who ruled not by love but by fear. "Ilara," he said finally, his voice smooth and low with a timbre that made her chest tighten. "I have been expecting you." She tried to steady her voice. I am here because my family asked me to." Darius's gaze cut her off, piercing yet unreadable. "Your family sent you to pay for a crime they say you committed. Tell me, do you feel guilty?" Ilara shook her head. "No, I didn't do it." He moved down the stairs, slow and deliberate. Every step seemed to echo like thunder. "Yet you are here, and now you belong to me." The words felt like chains around her chest. Belong to him. She had never imagined such a life, being handed over like property, but there was no room for protest. Not if she wanted her family to remain safe. Days passed in a haze. Ilara learned the rhythms of Darius's world, the quiet command in his voice, the sharp eyes that seemed to see through walls and lies, the silent understanding that no one could challenge him. Servants moved around her, but they were as tense as she was. Everyone feared him, and for good reason. Whispers in the hallways spoke of his ruthlessness, but also of a curse, something that made him feared even by the dark forces he commanded. Despite herself, Ilara could not ignore the curiosity that flickered in her chest whenever Darius appeared. He was more than a man of power. He was a puzzle, a storm contained within flesh and bone. There were moments, rare and fleeting, when his eyes softened, and she glimpsed the weight of a past she could not yet understand. One night, as thunder shook the mansion, Ilara wandered the halls, unable to sleep. She found herself in a small library filled with books that smelled of dust and magic. On a table lay a portrait, framed in black and gold. The woman in it had sharp features and dark eyes, eyes that seemed almost alive. Ilara froze. The resemblance was uncanny. Darius appeared behind her without a sound. "You see her," he said quietly. "Yes," Alara whispered. She looks like me." He studied her, a shadow crossing his face. "She was my sister, lost to me before I understood how cruel the world could be." "You are not here by chance, Alara. Some forces, old and relentless, have brought you to me." Alara's heart raced. What did he mean? Was this punishment or something else entirely? The days that followed were a mixture of fear and fascination. Darius would appear at unexpected moments, watching her with a careful eye, never touching but never leaving her alone. Alara's resentment simmered, yet she could not deny the strange pull she felt toward him. Each glance, each word, carried weight she could not explain. She tried to assert herself, to remind him that she was no one's possession. "I am not yours," she said one evening, voice trembling but firm. He smiled, a flash of something dangerous and gentle. "Perhaps not now, but you are mine while you are here. You must learn to survive under my rules, Alara, or the world will devour you." Her nights were restless. Dreams of fire and shadow haunted her sleep, of wings folding over dark skies and voices whispering her name. In these dreams she was both hunted and protected, terrified and exhilarated. When she awoke, the mansion felt colder, the hallways longer, and the weight of Darius's gaze more pressing. One evening, a messenger arrived with a sealed letter, marked with the sigil of a rival family. Alara knew it was a trap. She tried to hide it, but Darius found it before she could. "Who sent this?" he demanded, holding it with gloved hands. His eyes, sharp as blades, did not leave her face. Alara shook her head. "I don't know, I haven't." "You lie," he said softly, but with steel beneath the words. "I trust no one, Alara, especially not you." For the first time, fear and desperation mingled in her chest. She realized that the game she had been thrust into was more dangerous than she had imagined. Survival meant understanding him, predicting his moods, reading the shadows of the mansion like a map of hidden dangers. Yet even as fear clutched at her, a strange defiance bloomed. She would not be a pawn without a voice. And despite everything, a part of her wanted to understand him, to unravel the man behind the myth. The night deepened, and the storm raged outside, shaking the windows as if the world itself conspired to keep her trapped within these walls. Darius stood at the window, looking out at the city below, silent. Alara watched him from across the room, heart tight with a mixture of dread and fascination. Finally, he turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You may try to escape, Alara. Many have, none have succeeded, but perhaps you are different. Perhaps your presence here is meant to change more than just your fate." Alara felt a chill run down her spine. His words were both a warning and a promise. Something in the air shifted, as if the storm outside had entered the room with him. She realized then that her life was no longer her own. She belonged to Darius in this moment, whether she liked it or not, yet she could not predict what that meant. As the candles flickered and the mansion groaned under the weight of the storm, Alara's eyes fell on the portrait again. The woman with dark eyes stared back at her, a silent echo of a past she had yet to understand. And in that instant she understood. Nothing about her life would ever be the same. She had been handed over as punishment, trapped in a world ruled by a man she both feared and could not resist. And yet perhaps in this darkness something else waited, something dangerous, irresistible, and unknown. The wind howled through the corridors, carrying with it the promise of trials, secrets, and a connection that neither of them could yet name. Alara clutched her cloak tighter and took a deep breath. Whatever lay ahead, she would have to face it. Alone, and yet not alone at all. For in the Raven King's eyes, she had already begun to see a flicker of something more than cruelty. Something that might, one day, change everything. The morning after the storm, the city seemed quieter than usual, as if the rain had washed away not only the streets but also the clamor of gossip and fear. Alara walked through the corridors of Darius's mansion, her steps cautious. Each hall, each shadow, felt alive, whispering secrets she could not yet understand. She had been here long enough to know the rhythm of the household, silent glances from the servants, the way doors opened and closed without warning, the weight of Darius's presence even when he was not in the room. Darius himself remained a mystery. Some days he was distant and commanding, his voice sharp and precise. Other days he seemed softer, though only in the smallest gestures. A hand brushing aside her hair to keep it from her eyes, a nod of acknowledgement when she spoke. Those moments were fleeting, and Alara knew she must not mistake them for kindness. Yet they lingered in her thoughts, impossible to ignore. Her days were filled with strict routines. She learned quickly that in this house, mistakes were dangerous. One wrong word, one wrong glance, and Darius's temper could descend like a storm. But it was the moments in between, silent, loaded with tension, that made her heart race. They were small, almost invisible, yet she felt them everywhere. In the way he observed her from across the room, the way his shadow sometimes seemed to follow her, even when she thought she was alone. One afternoon, while exploring a part of the mansion she had not yet seen, Alara discovered a hidden courtyard. It was small, almost secret, enclosed by high stone walls covered in ivy. The sunlight filtering through the leaves created patterns on the ground, and for a moment she felt a rare sense of peace. She pressed her hand to the cool stone, listening to the quiet hum of life around her. "You found my garden," a voice said behind her. She turned sharply to see Darius standing at the entrance, his expression unreadable. The wind tugged at his dark coat, making him look like a shadow moving through sunlight. "It's beautiful," she said, though her voice wavered. "I didn't know a place like this existed here." Darius stepped closer, and she could feel the power radiating from him. "Few are allowed here," he said. "It is a place for thinking and remembering." His eyes softened just slightly, though the hard edge remained. "Do you understand what it means to be tied to someone else's power, Alara? To be caught in a chain not of your own making?" Alara looked away, ashamed to admit how much fear and confusion churned inside her. "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "Every day feels like walking on a knife's edge. I want to survive, but I don't know how." Darius regarded her silently for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you must learn. You must understand the world you are in, or it will consume you, and perhaps understand me as well. Though that may be harder than surviving this city." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, a young man with anxious eyes. He handed Darius a sealed envelope, then retreated quickly. Darius opened it with a single motion, reading silently before folding it and tucking it into his coat. His expression darkened, and Alara felt the tension in the room spike. "They are testing me," Darius said finally, voice low. "Rival families think they can strike at me through you. They are wrong, but you must understand they will not stop. And neither will I." Alara's heart raced. She had feared this world, but now she realized just how dangerous it truly was. "What should I do?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "Observe," he said. "Learn, watch everything, trust no one completely, and above all, survive." That night, as the mansion lay cloaked in darkness, Alara could not sleep. She wandered the halls again, drawn by curiosity and unease. She found herself outside Darius's study, a room she had been forbidden to enter. The door was slightly ajar, and faint candlelight spilled into the hallway. Inside, Darius was seated at a large wooden desk, papers and maps spread before him. His eyes were sharp as he studied them, but every so often they lifted, as if seeing something beyond the room itself. He did not notice her at first, and Alara felt a flicker of daring courage. She stepped closer, careful not to make a sound. A sudden gust of wind made the candle flicker, and Darius's head snapped up. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat the world seemed to stop. His gaze was intense, filled with something she could not name, curiosity, caution, and something softer, almost hidden. "You are brave," he said quietly, not angry, just stating it as a fact. "Or foolish." Maybe both, she admitted. Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. Darius leaned back, studying her. "Do you know why the curse follows me?" he asked suddenly. The question startled her. She had heard whispers, rumors, but never details. Alara shook her head. "No, only that it makes people afraid of you." He gave a faint, bitter smile. "It does more than that. It isolates me. It makes me see power as everything and trust as weakness. But you stir something I thought had died long ago." Alara felt her breath catch. The words were not threats, nor were they promises, yet they left a mark. For the first time, she understood that Darius was not merely cruel or powerful. He was trapped in a world as much as she was. Days passed, each filled with subtle lessons. Alara observed the servants, noting how they moved, how they spoke, how they avoided certain rooms and certain times of day. She watched Darius, too, learning the patterns in his speech, the weight of his silences, the fleeting moments when he allowed himself to appear human. She began to see the truth. Survival required more than hiding. It required understanding the heart of darkness itself. One evening, while walking through the secret courtyard, she found Darius waiting for her. He had removed his coat, revealing the strong lines of his shoulders, but his expression remained unreadable. "You grow more daring," he said, "or reckless. Which is it?" Alara met his gaze steadily. "I am learning. You said survival matters. I want to survive." Darius studied her, and for a moment the shadow over his face seemed to lift. "Then you are learning well," he said. "But do not forget, power is never kind, and it is never fair." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the courtyard, yet she did not feel relief. She felt the weight of something larger, something neither of them fully understood, beginning to pull at her life like a current beneath still water. That night, she dreamed again. In the dream, the mansion was empty except for her and Darius. Shadows curled around them, thick and alive. He reached for her hand, but the moment their fingers touched, darkness surged between them, separating them. "You must choose," he whispered, his voice echoing in the storm of shadows. "Do you follow the chains or break them?" She woke with a start, the rain from a passing storm tapping against her window. Her heart pounded. The dream felt like a warning and yet a promise. She did not fully understand what it meant, but one thing was certain. Her life had become a test of strength, courage, and the courage to see the man behind the myth. The days that followed brought new challenges. Rival factions moved in the city, testing Darius's strength, and by extension, hers. She witnessed his ruthlessness firsthand, not as a spectacle but as a necessary act of survival. Yet even in those moments she glimpsed the flicker of something softer, a hesitation, a glance, a word held back. It terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. One afternoon, while reviewing documents with Darius, a shadow moved along the edge of the room. Alara stiffened, sensing danger. Darius noticed her fear but did not move immediately. Instead, he allowed the moment to stretch, teaching her through observation rather than words. When the shadow finally stepped into the light, it was only a servant, but the lesson remained. In Darius's world, every movement, every glance, every whisper mattered. One misstep could unravel everything. That night, as she lay in her room, Alara pressed her hands to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her heart. Fear, fascination, longing, each emotion tangled together, impossible to separate. She realized that surviving Darius's world meant not only understanding him, but understanding herself, her own limits, her own courage. And as the candle burned low beside her bed, she knew this. She had been handed over as punishment, trapped in a mansion ruled by a man she could not yet trust. But the longer she stayed, the more she understood that survival was no longer enough. She wanted something more, something dangerous, irresistible, and yet entirely unknown. The wind howled through the mansion corridors, carrying with it the weight of secrets, power, and destiny. Alara shivered, not from cold but from the sense of inevitability. The chains of fate had brought her here, and the only choice she could make now was how she would meet them. The mansion was silent that evening, except for the wind that swept through the towers and rattled the old windows. Alara moved carefully through the halls, her steps echoing faintly against the stone floors. She had grown familiar with every corner, every shadow, yet tonight, something felt different. A sense of unease pressed against her chest, heavy and unyielding. Darius had been distant all day. His usual commanding presence was replaced with a quiet, almost haunted tension. He moved through the halls like a predator searching for prey, though the prey was invisible, and Alara wondered if the storm outside mirrored the one building inside him. She found him in the study, standing by the window, staring at the city below. The glow of lanterns flickered against his sharp features, casting shadows that seemed to dance across his face. He did not turn when she entered. "They are moving," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "The rivals, they test me, and they will test you." Alara stepped closer, heart racing. "I can handle them," she said, though doubt shadowed her words. She had seen enough of Darius's world to know that survival was never easy. "I have learned to be careful." Darius finally turned, and his eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. "Careful is not enough," he said. "You must understand, the city does not forgive weakness. It does not forgive trust placed in the wrong hands. Your family, they betrayed you, Alara." She froze, betrayed. Her thoughts raced, confusion and fear mingling. "My family." "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, the air between them charged. "They sent you to me for a reason, not to protect you but to bind you. They hoped to use your presence here to manipulate me, and perhaps to test your courage, but you are no longer theirs. You belong here, at least for now." Alara's mind spun. She had sacrificed herself for her family, believing she was protecting them. Now it seemed that very act had been twisted into a trap. Yet even as fear gnawed at her, another feeling rose, defiance. She would not be used, not by her family, not by Darius, not by fate itself. "I will not be a pawn," she said firmly. "If I stay, it will be on my own terms." Darius studied her for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. "Good, you are learning." The weeks that followed were a test unlike any Alara had imagined. Rival families moved boldly, sending threats, spies, and whispers meant to destabilize Darius's control. Alara watched carefully, learning to anticipate danger, to read subtle signs, to protect herself without drawing attention. And through it all, Darius remained close. Sometimes he would appear at her side unexpectedly, his presence both protective and intimidating. Other times he observed silently from the shadows, testing her, teaching her, allowing her to grow stronger. One night, as a storm rolled over the city once more, Darius summoned her to the courtyard. The air was heavy with rain and the scent of wet stone. Candles burned along the walls, their flames dancing in the wind. "You have done well," he said quietly, his voice low and controlled. "But the test is not over. It never ends. You must face the truth of who you are and of who I am." Alara's pulse quickened. "What truth?" He gestured toward the city below. "The crime you were accused of, it was not random, it was orchestrated by your family." Alara's knees went weak. "No, that cannot be true." "It is," he said softly, though the words carried the weight of inevitability. "They hope to bind you here, to control both your fate and mine. I am a man who trusts few, and they knew you would be the key." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Every memory of her family's demands, every whispered warning, every act of supposed protection, it had been a lie, carefully crafted to manipulate her. Anger, betrayal, and grief swirled together, and for the first time she understood the true nature of her chains. Darius stepped closer, his presence a mixture of power and something softer, almost hesitant. "Do not mistake their betrayal for mine. I did not orchestrate this. But now that you are here, we must face it together. Your strength, your courage, it matters." Alara looked at him, the storm reflected in her eyes. "Together," she repeated, uncertain. He nodded. You are no longer alone, but that does not mean the path will be easy. Danger surrounds us. And the choices we make will shape not only our fates but the fate of the city itself. Days passed, each filled with tension and training. Darius taught her how to read the people around them, how to anticipate threats, how to navigate the dangerous political games that ruled the city's shadows. Alara learned quickly, her mind sharpening with each lesson. And with each lesson, her respect, and something deeper, grew for the man who had once seemed untouchable. Yet as her understanding deepened, so did her fear. She saw glimpses of the curse that haunted him, the way he flinched at sudden noises, the way shadows seemed to follow him, the brief moments of vulnerability he never allowed anyone else to witness. She realized that beneath the power and the fear, Darius was a man trapped by forces beyond even his control. One evening, as they walked through the secret courtyard together, Alara dared to ask the question that had haunted her since the day she arrived. Darius, the curse, what is it really? He paused, staring at the wet stones beneath their feet. It is a shadow, he said finally, voice low. A debt from the past, a price for power I cannot undo. It demands control, it feeds on isolation, and it punishes any connection I allow. Alara felt a shiver run through her. Then why do you allow me here? His gaze met hers, steady and intense. Because you are not afraid of it, and because I do not know what I would do without you. Her heart ached at the admission, though she dared not show it. The line between fear and fascination blurred. She had come to respect him, to trust him in ways she did not fully understand. And yet, the stakes were higher than ever. The next night, the danger came. A rival faction had discovered her presence and struck at the mansion. Alarms rang through the halls, servants screamed, and the air filled with smoke and panic. Darius moved with precision, commanding and protecting, his every action a masterclass in control. Alara followed as best she could, moving through hidden passages and secret doors, her training and instincts guiding her. She realized then that she had grown stronger, sharper, braver than she had ever imagined. And yet, even with her newfound skill, fear never left her side. In the chaos, Darius was injured. A sharp cut along his arm bled, though he did not cry out. Alara rushed to his side, her hands steady despite the storm raging around them. You must be careful, she said, voice trembling but firm. I cannot lose you. His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable, yet filled with something raw and human. If I fall, it is not yours to bear, he said. But you have grown, stronger than I expected, and perhaps stronger than I am willing to admit. The battle ended as quickly as it began, the rivals retreating into the night. The mansion was damaged but still standing, and Darius, though wounded, remained unbroken. Alara helped him to a safe room, her hands steady as she tended to his injuries. For the first time, he allowed himself to lean on her just slightly, and in that moment the weight of the curse, the power, and the fear seemed almost bearable. She realized then that the bond between them had changed. It was no longer just survival. It was trust. It was reliance. It was something deeper, something neither of them had expected but could no longer deny. Days passed in quiet recovery, though the tension never fully lifted. They trained, they planned, and they learned to navigate a world that would not forgive weakness. And through it all, the unspoken bond between them deepened, each glance, each gesture carrying weight. Alara understood now that the chains of fate had brought her here, but the bond she shared with Darius, fraught with danger, tension, and unspoken longing, was something she could choose, something she could nurture, something that might one day change everything. And as the storm clouds parted, revealing a pale moon above the city, Alara stood beside Darius in the secret courtyard. The wind tugged at their cloaks, the night humming with possibility and danger. I am ready, she whispered, ready to face whatever comes next, together. Darius's eyes met hers, and for the first time the walls around him seemed to shift, if only slightly. Together, he agreed, his voice low, steady, and certain. The night held its breath, heavy with secrets and possibilities. Outside the mansion, shadows moved, and the city whispered of challenges yet to come. Alara knew the next trials would be harder, the dangers greater, and the choices more perilous. But for the first time, she did not feel entirely alone. And for the first time, she realized that even in a world of darkness and power, trust, and perhaps even love could exist. The mansion was quiet, but the air was thick with tension. Alara stood in the secret courtyard, her heart pounding as the first light of dawn touched the stone walls. Darius stood beside her, his dark coat fluttering in the morning breeze. His eyes were sharp, unreadable, yet behind them flickered the weight of a man who had carried centuries of fear and power on his shoulders. The message was clear, Darius said, his voice low and even. They know of us. They know of our bond. And they will strike before the sun rises fully. Alara nodded, her fingers brushing the stone beneath her. Her mind raced. She had trained for this, prepared herself for danger, but the reality of it was heavier than she had imagined. This was not a test she could fail and survive. Failure here would mean destruction, not only for her but for Darius, the mansion, and everything they had built together. Then we fight, she said firmly. We stop them together. Darius studied her, a flicker of something soft appearing in his dark eyes. You have grown stronger, he said, stronger than I ever expected, and perhaps that is what makes all of this bearable. The sun rose higher, painting the courtyard in pale gold. Alara felt the first tendrils of hope threading through her chest, but fear remained. They moved quickly, gathering allies from among those they trusted within the mansion. Darius gave commands, sharp and precise, while Alara coordinated with quiet authority. Together they were a force, combining cunning, skill, and trust in ways neither had thought possible. As the enemy approached, shadows stretched across the stone walls. Figures moved silently through the city, aiming to strike before the mansion could be fully prepared. But Darius had anticipated them, and Alara had learned well. Each step, each glance, each whisper of movement was calculated and deliberate. When the attack began, it was sudden and fierce. Lanterns were knocked over, alarms rang, and the enemy forces surged forward, intent on seizing the mansion and eliminating its defenders. But Alara and Darius moved like one, reading each other's signals, countering each attack with strategy and precision. Amid the chaos, Alara saw Darius falter for the first time, not in strength, but in hesitation. A shadow from his past, a threat born of the curse that had haunted him, appeared in the enemy ranks. The air seemed to thrum with tension as the darkness pressed closer, testing not only their skill but their courage. Alara, Darius called, voice sharp. Now, she understood immediately. The bond between them had become more than trust, it was instinct. She moved swiftly, using the knowledge and training he had given her. With careful precision, she disrupted the enemy formation, creating space for Darius to act. He struck with power and control, but also with restraint. Though he could have crushed them all, he chose only to defend what was right and necessary. Alara watched him, awe mixing with fear, realizing that this was a man who had once been bound by darkness, yet now wielded strength with conscience and purpose. The battle continued until the city's first light shone fully, illuminating the courtyard and revealing the enemy's retreat. The mansion remained intact, and those who had come to test Darius now lay defeated, humbled by the combined force of power and strategy. Breathing heavily, Alara turned to Darius. He had a small cut on his arm, a reminder that even a man like him was not invincible. You fought well, she said softly. So did you, he replied, his voice low, almost tender. You were fearless and precise. I am proud of you. Alara's heart quickened. Pride from him was rare, fleeting, yet it carried weight heavier than any words she had heard before. She realized then that the bond between them had transformed into something more profound, a connection forged in trust, danger, and mutual respect. In the days that followed, the mansion began to recover. Repairs were made, the servants resumed their routines, and the city slowly adjusted to the knowledge that Darius remained unchallenged. But the true change was in the bond between him and Alara. They moved through the halls with a quiet understanding, their glances carrying words neither spoke aloud. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Darius led Alara to the secret courtyard. The air was warm and the first stars began to appear, reflected in the puddles left by a recent rain. "Alara," he said, voice steady yet soft, "the curse that has haunted me, it is no longer absolute. You have shown me something I thought lost forever." "What do you mean?" she asked, heart fluttering. "I mean connection, trust, hope," he said, meeting her gaze. "I have lived in shadow and fear for so long that I forgot what it meant to feel. But you have reminded me, and for that I am grateful." Alara reached out, her fingers brushing against his coat. "And I have learned from you," she whispered, "not only to survive but to understand strength, to see beyond fear." Darius's hand hovered near hers, then slowly covered it, the contact gentle yet commanding. "Then we are changed," he said, "not just by circumstance but by each other." For a long moment they stood together in silence, the wind weaving through the ivy and the city quiet below. The storm, the danger, and the fear of the past seemed distant now, replaced by something fragile yet undeniable, a bond built on respect, trust, and shared trials. The following days were filled with quiet work. Alara helped Darius plan for the future, understanding the delicate balance of power in the city, while Darius guided her with patience, teaching her not just how to navigate threats, but how to wield influence with conscience and fairness. Each day their connection deepened, a quiet intimacy growing without words, built on mutual reliance and understanding. One night, as the moon cast silver light across the courtyard, Darius took Alara's hand in his. "The city will always be dangerous," he said. "Power will always demand vigilance, but I no longer fear facing it with you by my side." Alara's heart leapt. "Neither do I," she replied. "Together we are stronger than any darkness that comes." He drew closer, careful, respectful, yet with a certainty that made her breath catch. "Then let us face it, not as master and pawn, but as equals," he said. "Not bound by punishment, not bound by fear, free in our own way." Alara felt the weight of his words settle over her. Freedom did not mean escape. Freedom meant choice. It meant understanding, courage, and the willingness to stand beside someone, no matter the danger. And for the first time, she realized that she had truly chosen to be here, not because of obligation, but because she wanted to. As dawn approached once more, they stood together in the courtyard. The city below was waking, unaware of the trials that had passed, unaware of the bond that had formed in its shadows. And yet, in that quiet moment, Alara and Darius understood that they had survived, grown, and transformed. The curse that had once seemed invincible had lost its hold. Not because it had been destroyed, but because it had been confronted with courage, trust, and the power of connection. They had faced darkness together and emerged stronger, changed, and ready for whatever the future might hold. Alara turned to Darius, her voice steady. "We were never meant to escape, only to choose each other." He nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "And we did," he said, his voice soft yet full of certainty. "The city may always hold shadows, but we have found our light." The wind stirred the ivy around them, carrying the scent of rain and the promise of a new beginning. The mansion, once a fortress of fear and power, now felt like a home, not safe in the absence of danger, but safe in the presence of understanding, trust, and shared courage. And as the first rays of sunlight broke over the city, Alara and Darius stepped forward together, ready to face the world, not as captor and captive, not as master and pawn, but as partners bound by choice, loyalty, and a bond forged in the shadows yet strengthened by love. Outside the walls of the mansion, the city awoke. Shadows lingered, whispers moved, and the streets carried the weight of history and danger. But inside the courtyard, Alara and Darius were free, not from the world but from the chains that had once controlled them. Together they had faced darkness, confronted betrayal, and found redemption. And in that, they had discovered something stronger than power, deeper than fear, and more enduring than any curse: trust, courage, and the promise of a shared future.